Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I got your attention, and I guess rightfully so, because the next 30 minutes we're going to talk about some very extraordinary and important findings that will have, I guess, in the near future, quite tremendous impact of what we as a European industry, and I presume most of you are from a European industry, will need to keep in mind and how to pivot and transform our industries. My name is Saluveer. I'm a head of Cannes Next and the strategic advisor to the Marché du Film. And I have a great pleasure to introduce our long-term partners and extraordinary partners who have been intrinsic in Cannes Next, but actually through the whole Marché experience. So Lucia Recalde, head of unit at the DG Connect Creative Europe Media, and Bastien, Remy? Thank you, from the unit as well. And we're going to talk about the European media outlook. Before we start, let me give you a little bit of a context. Question, do you know how much an average European or American spends on a screen per day? How many hours? 7. Cold? 15. Okay, quite warm. More? Any other offers? 20. Still a bit cold. So, well, at the beginning of a year, the Activate Media Outlook, which is a great report, they actually measured the average time people spend on screens. In the US, if we counter multitasking with technology and media, it's 32 hours, because whilst you're watching your European film on a streaming show, you're texting to your friend, maybe you're listening something else, and etc. But if you take that away, it's 13 hours, presuming that we all need to sleep, we need to go to work, and etc. The question really becomes then, is it really about the content, but is it really access to the customer? How do you really get into that time slot? Why would the European viewer in your specific domain take the reason and allocate time to your festival, to your organization, to the film you're producing, the TV show, and etc.? And I guess this is maybe a little bit of a intense yet relevant context to the media outlook. And the European Commission has been working quite intensely and seriously on an extraordinary review, over 100 pages, as I've heard, that really puts out some very important numbers and facts and figures to take away and think where we're heading our industry. Lucia, where did the media outlook come from?
Well, the media outlook started when we prepared the Media and Audiovisual Action Plan. It was December 2020, in the midst of the COVID crisis. And we realized that, of course, we have really to protect the industry, but that there were changes that were happening almost at a speed light, and that we really needed up-to-date market intelligence to understand which direction we were heading off. And that's the origin of the media outlook. Maybe there are 3 elements that make it, I think, a bit specific. The first one is that we wanted to take what we call a kind of holistic ecosystem approach. We have been working in silos, so industry, audiovisual industry in one side, gaming in the other, and we see that there are more interactions and interplay between the different media segments. So that was an important one for us. The second one is that we really wanted to understand consumer behavior and consumer trends. And for the first time, I'm proud that we did an extensive survey really to try to understand what triggers a person to go and watch X, Y, or Z, and how they watch it. And also we have some data on VOD consumption. So I think these are very important elements. And last but certainly not least, we cannot forget the tech developments. This is an intrinsic part of the industry. And for us, even if we didn't anticipate, for example, the huge development of AI, we really wanted to give a sense of direction of what is happening in terms of technological trends that are really extremely affecting the audiovisual industry, the media industries at large. So that were, I would say, the 3 drivers of the work we have done. We have launched a lot of studies. We have been in contact with the industry. What can I say? In some sectors, maybe, I will stop here, there were no data. When it comes to gaming, we have to start almost from scratch. And on consumption as well, there were hardly no data. And for some parts of the work, for example, examining the contractual arrangements, we have to ask the data to those that had the data, meaning the broadcasters and streamers on the one side, but the producers on the other. And here, and I will stop, I think it's maybe we got a response not as huge as we would have liked, but still something that gives us, I think, some chance and a sense of direction.
Sten, which of the stakeholders were involved in the process?
So many of them, depending on the different reports that we and studies and questionnaires that we have circulated. Of course, the one that Lucia mentioned on the different business practices, we draw a sample of producers, but also streamers, and that's also echoing the call of Lucia. We'll probably take this forward with further reflection, and we hope to get more results, more insights from the industry. I think we received data from 1 out of 4 producers and 1 out of 3 streamers. So of course, the more robust the data we get, the more we can also use it at a later stage.
So let's then get into the 3 pillars. The report outlines 3 pillars or 3 core areas where some tremendous findings were put forward. What are the 3 pillars of the findings?
We're trying to live up to the tremendous findings, Sten. We're trying to live up to it. No, perhaps 3
I think
to
they're
highlight.
quite tremendous.
We can highlight a few, and there's a lot more that you will find on the report itself. The first one that is much discussed is the one on intellectual property, and that's not new. We know it emerges as a rather important asset for the industry, and there we try to research a little bit the details of the contractual relationships between producers on the one hand, streamers, broadcasters on the other. I'll keep it simple for now. We may come back to it a little bit later. That's one area. Another one is on technology trends. Of course, that remains important. For those of you who followed the intervention of Commissioner Breton on Thursday, as he said, not many people were discussing generative AI a year or 2 years ago. Now it's very much in the
100 million for ChatGPT in January.
Sorry?
100 million users for ChatGPT in January.
Exactly. So that's already sort of behind us. It has started. We have virtual production. We have extended reality. Just a quote, a figure on extended reality. The market is supposed to grow 40% every year until 2026. So that becomes also a huge segment to invest in, but a segment in which the European industry is perhaps not as present as other competitors. If you take the 10 largest companies worldwide, they control 84% of the European market so far. None of them is European so far. So those are areas of work. And the last one, and to keep it short, on consumption, what we want to do with consumption on VOD, and there again we want to complement the great work that is done by the Audiovisual Observatory on cinema with our insights on VOD. And there the point was to democratize a little bit this data. We know how important it is for the industry to know what's happening and not have only their data, but also data from other platforms, and that's what we're trying to do.
So I want to come back to the audiovisual industry. I think the findings in the audiovisual industry in terms of the companies operating in the market versus the revenue delivered and let's say the efficiency on the market, especially regarding the broadcasters, was rather striking. So would you like to elaborate on this?
In terms of the availability and consumption?
Yes. And the revenues generated.
Lucia was about to.
Oh, I start.
Go ahead.
No, I think, you raised a lot of points. I will start and you continue. I think it's very important when it comes that it has been a huge process of consolidation of the audiovisual industry. We see this consolidation, so the bigger players are becoming bigger and bigger, especially outside Europe. And in Europe, there has been some consolidation process, but certainly not as big as in other countries. So, and our industry, we have the data, is relatively fragmented. We is primarily composed of small companies. However, the revenues are primarily 50% of the revenues are generated by the biggest companies. So we see a market structure, I said, composed of a lot of small companies. However, the revenues are concentrated only in the big and large companies. So here, I think there is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Scale matters, and scale matters a lot. So in that context, what are we going to do really to preserve our, I would say, Europeanness of our companies, but understanding that the market is really, I would say, this size matters. So definitely, in my view, it's about time to start thinking about new models of collaboration in a way that we haven't thought it before, because that will be the only possibility to have the investment capabilities needed to be able, I think, to compete with those players that have bigger pockets and they have much more technologically equipped to really operate not only the European market, but also in a more global market.
I want to come back to this subject again, but if you look at the executive summary, and I presume the report is out, then we understand that the role of broadcasters as very important delivery vehicles for European content is primary. And this is very, very important because at South by Southwest a few months ago, there was quite a large discussion between European ecosystems and American ecosystem facilitated by Future Media Hubs. And one of the key findings actually was out of that discussions that in the big game with the global platforms, the European broadcasters as main vehicles have a huge opportunity. If they are able to build products, it's not really about the content, but it's about the quality of the products, services, and the delivery to the customer. Am I correct in my conclusion, what I also read from the, or interpreted from the report?
No, absolutely. We have the same, we remark the same things, that they're very much present, not just in terms of the content offer, supported by the funding, public financing, but also actually in terms of viewing time. The figure we found was that 1/3 of the viewing time of audiovisual works in Europe is involving public broadcasters. So they're still very much prominent in terms of viewing, also in terms of brand value and trust. That's very important. In this report, we'll probably not discuss it too much, but you'll see there's a chapter on news media on top of video game and audiovisual sector, and there they retain a lot of trust from the different European users. So that's a key thing. Yeah.
So how do we actually deliver scale? We have a lot of micro VOD platforms which have great content, but don't reach the customer on a scale. So what types of alliances and what types of larger scaling models Europe can build, I guess, is a key question. Let's talk about the audience preferences.
I start? So no, we are very happy actually to discuss about audiences, because we wouldn't like to give too gloomy a picture of the situation. I think there are elements of, I would say, of concern. But at the same time, I think there are some opportunities that I would like to present to you. We did this huge survey on consumer preferences that has covered 15 European countries. It was done by Ipsos, so I would say a very authoritative company. And I would like to bring to your attention to findings that in our view are relevant for the European industry, is that there is much more openness today than in the past to watch content irrespective of the origin of the content. And we think, because from our data, 80% said, I'm likely to watch US content, but 71 said, I'm open to watch content from Europe. And it is not a big difference. But then there was another question saying, which content you find attractive? And we saw there that 45% thought US content is very attractive, 44% is national content, and then UK content and non-national European content stands at 28. So there is no a priori any kind of negative, I would say, view on European content, but what does it happen that this content is not really available?
Can I make a little quiz? How many of you is subscribed to one European VOD platform? How many of you is subscribed to 2 European platforms? How many of you are subscribed to 3 European VOD platforms? Well, I think we can kind of drive the conclusion, right? I won't ask a question about those other ones, though.
But I think there is another element.
Yes. Fair enough.
But I think there is another element that for us is very important, and it's the question of the promotion. I mean, maybe there is really a lot of content that is available in our figures when it comes to VOD consumption. The consumption is hugely concentrated, but it's actually more concentrated in few titles for EU content than for US content. So I think maybe we need to ask ourselves the question whether there is a problem of too much supply or overproduction of content. And whether we really need to think about whether we need to give a chance to the content that is really well promoted, well branded, and well marketed, so there is a chance to discover it by the audiences.
And accessible also on a platform or a way that is basically on the standard that customers would like to get the premium one.
Just to add to this, on just one figure to illustrate this, if you take the 1% of European content, 1% of the works accounts for more than 40% of consumption. So that's the level of concentration there is.
So yeah, again, I think this really raises the question about scale. And if some of you have been looking at international reports as well, and we definitely see that the last year has been a huge year of layoffs from big tech, tens of thousands of people. The investments from their side into content are decreasing, then perhaps we should really think of it as an opportunity to drive our homegrown offerings of hopefully more than 1% to European consumers and European customers. Let's talk about the new buckets, gaming, interactive, IP, virtual production, and so forth. What were the interesting findings from there?
Well, first of all is the size of the market and the growing market. If you take the global scale, it represents about 180 billion euros worth of market. The size of the European market is slightly decreasing, but the figures outperform other media and audiovisual sectors. So that gives a bit of a scale. And then next to scale, you have the trend. What we see, what you probably see as well, is that a kind of convergence as well of the audiovisual sector with video gaming, with more interactivity across the whole spectrum. So that's why we wanted to have a bit more insights, because this could be the future of the market, the interaction of video gaming, and we see actually big platforms now investing or adapting their investments in this sector.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 40% of the European play games every day. We are speaking here about more than 125 million of people, because I think we need to, maybe we are not aware that gaming today is bigger than music and cinema together, simply to give an order of magnitude of the size of the market. And also one of the findings when it comes to gaming is not just my children, a third of the people of my age also play games. So it has become really very, very mainstreaming. And something that Bastien mentioned, I think, is very important. When you look at the big blockbusters and big success today in cinema, is Super Mario. Where does it come from? When we look at Last of Us, it also originated, the IP originated in gaming. When we look in our data on VOD consumption, to one of the big hits in VOD platforms was The Witcher. Probably success coming from gaming. So I think gaming now, because of this huge audience base, is becoming a wonderful basis for IP to be exploited, because they build on an existing and very faithful audience base, then maximize it, capitalize it, and this gives also a second life in some cases to the game itself. And it allows also exploiting the IP in many, many different formats. So I think we believe this is a trend that we should be following. And sorry.
Yes, and for preparing for this session, I did a little mathematical exercise, very broad. I kind of calculated the number of companies in the audiovisual sector and divided by revenues, and then I took the ones in the second pillar or the gaming sector and I divided by revenues. And of course, you see that the ratio, economic ratio between those two sectors are completely different. And it's a very hard fact, and I think that should drive some very good insights forward. But really, before we go into the recommendations or the future outlook, we also have to talk about the future audiences. What does the report say about the present audiences, say, between 16 to 24?
So, as the younger person of the two, I have to reply to this one.
You sure?
Okay. On this point, there's no complete disconnection with larger trends. You still have younger people, if you look at the news media sector, watching TV or using the same kind of platforms. But it's true that the trend more and more is going to other platforms. If you take the video game, since we're discussing video game, you have more and more platforms. You have Roblox, with which you are familiar. There's one figure that struck me, is half of the users worldwide are under 13 years old. So probably the rest of the sector may follow a certain similar trend. And these platforms are not just gaming platforms or the visual platforms. Now they aggregate a lot more activities from selling your content or selling your creations to shopping or fashion. We know how much fashion is investing in these platforms. So that one is growing. More people are going to it. So one challenge in this context for these industries to learn how to monetize and value their creation, whether audiovisual works or digital assets, into these new markets.
Yeah, so how much effort European producers or IP owners are making their assets available in those spaces. By the way, I would like to say that if Gen Z, roughly it has been said that Gen Z, who is also digitally native, and they are born after 1997, I think this is the kind of the year, then in about 5 years they are the core of the society. So, and 5 years in our industry is very, very short. So I think the question is, how are we talking to the future core of the society in a very, very near future? What are the kind of the implications and recommendations of those findings for you internally, and what kind of, let's say, broader conclusions we can take out of those quite powerful numbers?
Well, on purpose, this is a report that does not include any recommendations, and this was not done by accident.
Yes,
it was
let's
done
say
by
directions.
design. But I think what we would like using this report is to really engage in a conversation with the whole industry. Because you see, the report is very rich, it covers a lot of different things, and we would like to start this conversation. Commissioner Breton actually announced that he would like to establish a kind of reflection about those findings. And for me, this is a conversation that we need to take quite quickly, because I think there is a bit of a sense of urgency. I don't want, by no means, to sound too alarming, but the speed at which things are changing is unprecedented. And I think maybe in European industry we have been, in the past, maybe I would say a bit slow. And so I think this agility, this speed, I think this is a very important element. Another important element, in our view, is that maybe innovation, experimentation, trying things, try and error, maybe we will fail, but maybe this is now a very fertile ground to really come with these trial and error approaches. It has to be controlled, of course, but certainly we really need now to think about these innovations. And another important element for us, but as I said, this has to be a conversation, is that we cannot longer keep working in silos. Really, we need to foster the interplay between different segments of the industry. If you come back to the gaming, when we did this research on contractual practices, the producers considered that the IP generated or could go to other formats was not the most valuable one, for example. So can we do something to try to bring producers with, gaming industry and see what emerges out of there? Because we don't have in Europe that many vertical or integrated companies that encompasses these different segments.
Absolutely.
So we really need to bring the content people. This is what you do here in Next. But I think it's one of the key messages of this report is that we need to foster those interactions at a completely different scale compared to what we have done so far.
And very briefly on investment, of course, because we speak of business relationship and imbalances. Behind this, there's the issue of investment, and we see some difficulties. Using this occasion to say that we have the program Media Invest, co-built between the European Commission and the Investment Fund, that will issue in a few weeks from now a first grant agreement with intermediaries to be able to offer loans. Yeah. To try to offer loans to the audiovisual sector and try to give the means for their ambitions.
Can I pose that the key question here really is to go from producing more to becoming more relevant to the audiences, and then building the means to get to them?
Well, I think, as I said, relevance is a very important concept in both economical and cultural terms. And I think we said it before, and being relevant means that we need to establish a different relationship with the audiences. And the audiences, you rightly pointed out, the youngsters as well, that are really accessing or consuming content in a completely different manner. So if I fully agree with you that this relevance is economically speaking, of course, because that's the future of the industry, but also culturally speaking.
And more than producing, perhaps promoting. I think that there was an insights from the Audiovisual Observatory conference this morning, a long discussion on this. Perhaps this point of building a bridge to the audiences with promotion, knowing that the diversity of production seems to be there.
Less is more.
As they said this morning. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to touch, we have very, very short amount of time, but 2 points. Having the desire to pivot or going to innovate or look into another place, I think is one thing. The other thing there is definitely skills. How do we need to pivot the skill market and in which ways and how and what the report says about this?
That's a question that is very important for us because as it happens this year is the European Year of Skills. And what we have identified in the report, if there is something common across the different segments of the media ecosystem, is the skill shortages with different degrees and intensities. Just to give you an example, under video game, the company said that they have 40% of the companies declared problems to really hire people. That's quite big. But certainly the problems of finding skilled people is something we see in other segments. Take virtual production. That's something I know is very dear to you.
Yes,
Sten.
and totally unrelated to the report, but colloquially, the salary of a very good virtual production supervisor in that other country across the Atlantic is between $35,000 to $40,000 per week. Per week. This is the shortage of the professionals in the market. Very visible in Europe as well.
I will retrain Sten.
We'll talk about it. Well, at our European VP Summit next year.
But as I said, we see, for example, virtual production. There is the market is growing 20% annually, but there is a kind of bottlenecks when it comes to skills. So we definitely need to do very quickly a diagnosis with the industry and get our act together. On our side, we will certainly reflect on which changes can be brought to the media program, the skills component that is tiny, it's small, but certainly I think it has to be really redesigned to be fit for purpose and be able to respond to these unmet needs in the market.
And the opportunity we have is the underlying technologies of now different sectors, such as audiovisual and gaming. The underlying technologies are common. So you can also, to a certain extent, train people, cut brain drain, and try to give them opportunities in all sectors altogether.
What is the road ahead?
So the road ahead is what Commissioner Breton announced, is really we need to do an outreach strategy, consult, and reflect so that we can pave the way, I'm quoting the Commissioner, pave the way really for that there will be a next commission and we have all the elements we need to take well-informed decisions. And we will get back to you to start this process of engaging with the industry quite quickly.
Thank you very much. I think this was an extraordinary 30 minutes of insights. If I recap this a bit, then people love European films. The question then is, of course, how do we make them accessible and how do we think or manage ourselves into the audience head? How do we actually build scale and good products to reach them? We definitely have to look into the new buckets that are booming next to our audiovisual industry. And certainly, I would knock also on your hearts to think about those people who will be the core of the European society in the next 5 years.
Bastien, where is the report available? Because that's the most important thing we may have forgot to mention from the beginning.
You have a QR code on your seats, and otherwise on the media account of the program, media.eu, then you can find the report and the main findings.
Thank you very much for sharing those insights with us.